Have you ever walked out of a job interview feeling amazing, only to get the email that says, "We've decided to move forward with another candidate"?
That email hurts so much.
It really does. And sometimes it feels even worse when you genuinely believed you did everything right.
Exactly. You replay the whole interview in your head thinking, wait, what did I say wrong?
And that's the dangerous part. Most people think they didn't get the job because they weren't smart enough, experienced enough, or qualified enough.
But usually, that's not the real reason, right?
Right. In many cases, you lose the job because of small mistakes you didn't even notice. Tiny things. The way you answered a question, the way you talked about your old boss, the energy you gave off, even the words you chose.
That's scary, because sometimes you can ruin an interview without realizing it.
Exactly. And the worst part is, no one tells you why. Companies rarely explain the real reason you were rejected.
They just send a polite email and disappear.
Which means you keep making the same mistakes again and again in future interviews.
And then you start thinking, maybe I'm just unlucky.
But today, we're going to change that. Because in this episode, we're breaking down 20 reasons you didn't get the job.
And some of these reasons are going to surprise you.
Definitely, because a lot of people think interviews are only about skills and qualifications.
But interviews are also about psychology.
Exactly. Employers are constantly asking themselves silent questions during the interview.
Like what?
Questions like, can I trust this person? Will they fit into the team? Do they seem positive? Would I enjoy working with them every day?
Wow. So even if your resume is strong, you can still lose the job if you create the wrong feeling.
That's exactly right, because interviews are emotional decisions disguised as logical decisions.
That is such a powerful sentence.
Think about it. Two candidates can have the same experience, the same education, and similar skills, but one person gets hired because they made the interviewer feel more comfortable, more confident, and more excited.
So if you've been getting rejected, it doesn't automatically mean you're bad at your job.
Not at all. It may simply mean you're making one or two interview mistakes that are easy to fix once you become aware of them.
And I think that's important because a lot of people blame themselves too much.
They do. And if that's you, I want you to know something. Rejection does not always mean you're not good enough.
Sometimes it just means you need a better strategy.
Exactly. And by the end of this episode, you'll probably recognize at least a few mistakes you've made before.
I already feel nervous because I know I've definitely made some bad interview mistakes in the past.
Honestly, most people have. Even confident people, even smart people, even experienced people.
So if you've ever been rejected after an interview and wondered why, stay with us, because some of these reasons are things almost nobody talks about.
And one of the biggest mistakes people make happens before they even answer the first question.
That's crazy.
It is, but once you hear it, you'll never look at interviews the same way again.
And before we jump in, comment below and tell us the strangest interview question you've ever been asked.
And if you want to improve your English while learning real-life communication skills, make sure you subscribe to Talk Easy Daily, because we have a lot more videos coming that can help you sound more confident in interviews, conversations, and everyday life. The first reason you didn't get the job is simple, but it destroys so many interviews. You arrived without researching the company.
That sounds obvious, but I think people still do it all the time.
They do. A lot of people prepare answers about themselves, but they forget to learn about the company. Then the interviewer asks, "What do you know about us?" And suddenly there's silence.
Or they give a super weak answer like, "I know you're a big company."
Exactly. That answer immediately tells the interviewer you're not that interested. It makes it seem like you're applying everywhere without caring where you end up.
And companies want to feel special.
They do. They want to believe you chose them for a reason. Even if you desperately need a job, you should still show that you understand their mission, products, values, or recent achievements.
So before any interview, you should spend time on their website, social media, and maybe even recent news articles.
Absolutely. Because when you say something like, "I saw your company recently expanded into new markets, and that's one reason I was excited to apply," you instantly sound more serious.
It makes you sound prepared and interested.
And here's a quick tip. Before your next interview, write down 3 facts about the company and one reason you genuinely want to work there.
That's such an easy thing to do, but it can completely change how the interviewer sees you.
The second reason people don't get hired is because they talk too much.
Oh wow, I know people think talking more makes them sound smarter.
But sometimes it has the opposite effect. You answer a simple question with a 5-minute story, and by the end, even you forget what the original question was.
I've done that before. I get nervous and just keep talking.
A lot of people do. Nerves can make you speak too fast, too long, and without structure. The problem is that interviewers often interpret that as poor communication skills.
So instead of sounding confident, you sound disorganized.
Exactly. Let's say the interviewer asks, "Tell me about a challenge you faced at work." A weak answer jumps all over the place.
Like, well, there was this one time, actually maybe 2 times, and then my coworker.
Right, but a strong answer is clear and organized. You explain the situation, what you did, and what happened in the end.
Short, focused, and easy to follow.
And remember, interviewers are busy. If you make them work too hard to understand you, they may start losing interest.
That's such a good point. People think more words are better, but sometimes fewer words are more powerful.
Exactly. Strong communicators know how to be clear, not just long.
So if you tend to talk too much, maybe practice answering common interview questions in under 1 minute.
That's a great exercise, because if you can explain your ideas simply, you instantly sound more professional.
And if you're finding this useful so far, comment below with the interview mistake you think you've made before. I think a lot of us are going to recognize ourselves in this episode.
The fourth reason you may not have gotten the job is because you seemed negative.
This one is huge.
It is, and sometimes people don't even realize they sound negative. Maybe they complain about their old boss, maybe they say their last company was terrible, maybe they sound angry about a previous job.
And even if everything you say is true, it still creates a bad feeling.
Exactly. Imagine you're the interviewer. If a candidate spends 10 minutes criticizing their old company, what are you going to think?
You're probably going to think, if we hire this person, they'll complain about us too.
That's exactly what happens. Employers want positive, calm, solution-focused people. They know every workplace has problems.
So instead of saying, my manager was awful and nobody respected me, you can say something like, I was looking for a healthier work environment with more opportunities to grow.
Perfect. Same message, but much stronger presentation.
I think this is where body language matters too.
Absolutely. Your face, your posture, your eye contact, your smile, all of these things communicate energy. If you look tired, uninterested, or distracted, it affects the whole interview.
And the truth is, sometimes people think they look calm, but they actually look bored.
That's painful but true. So if possible, practice in front of a mirror or record yourself answering questions. You may notice habits you didn't realize you had.
That's uncomfortable, but probably really helpful.
It is, because self-awareness can completely change your interview performance.
And honestly, a lot of people never practice at all. They just show up and hope for the best.
Which leads perfectly into reason number 5. You gave generic answers.
Interviewers hear the same boring phrases every day.
They really do. I'm hardworking. I'm a team player. I'm passionate.
Everyone says those things.
Exactly. The problem is that words alone are weak. Anyone can say they're hardworking.
But not everyone can prove it.
That's the key. Interviewers trust examples more than labels. If you say, I'm hardworking, that's forgettable. But if you say, at my last job, I stayed late for 2 weeks to help finish an important project before the deadline, that's memorable.
Because now they can picture you doing it.
Exactly. Stories create trust. Stories make you feel real.
So instead of saying, I'm good under pressure, you can say, during a busy season, we were short-staffed and I had to manage 3 major tasks at once while still meeting every deadline.
Perfect example. The more specific you are, the more believable you become.
And I think this is something viewers can use immediately. Before your next interview, think of 3 short stories from your work experience.
Yes, 1 story about solving a problem, 1 story about working with a team, and 1 story about handling a difficult situation.
Because those stories can be used for so many different questions.
Exactly. And here's the interesting part. Interviewers may forget your exact words, but they'll remember the stories you told.
That's powerful.
Reason number 6 is something people rarely think about. You asked no questions at the end of the interview.
Oh, yes, when the interviewer says, do you have any questions for us? And you say, no, I'm good.
That answer is a missed opportunity.
because asking questions shows curiosity and confidence.
Exactly. It tells the company that you're thinking seriously about the role. It also makes the interview feel more like a conversation instead of an interrogation.
So, what kind of questions should people ask?
Questions like, what does success look like in this role? Or, what are the biggest challenges your team is facing right now?
Those are such smart questions.
Or even, what do you enjoy most about working here?
I love that one because it feels warm and personal.
It does, and it often creates a more relaxed ending to the interview.
So, if you've ever said no questions, don't worry, a lot of people do that.
But from now on, always prepare at least 3 questions before every interview.
Because the interview is not only about whether they want you.
It's also about whether they want you.
And in the next part, we're going to talk about some even bigger mistakes people make during interviews, including one tiny habit that can make you seem dishonest even when you're telling the truth.
And trust me, once you hear it, you'll notice it everywhere. Reason number 11 is something that surprises a lot of people. You gave inconsistent answers.
What do you mean by inconsistent?
I mean your answers didn't match each other. Maybe at the beginning of the interview you said you love teamwork, but later you said you prefer working alone all the time.
Or you say you're very organized, but then you describe a situation where you forgot an important deadline.
Exactly. Interviewers pay attention to those little contradictions, and when your story changes too much, they may start wondering if you're being honest.
Even if you are honest, it can still create doubt.
Right. And once doubt enters the interview, it's hard to recover from it.
So people should try to keep a clear picture of who they are and what they want before the interview starts.
Exactly. Think about the main message you want to communicate. Maybe you want the interviewer to see you as reliable, hardworking, adaptable, or creative.
And then make sure your examples support that message.
Yes, because the strongest candidates feel consistent from beginning to end.
They seem like they know themselves.
Exactly. And that confidence is powerful.
What's the next mistake?
Reason number 8 is poor body language.
This one is so important because people communicate so much without speaking.
They really do. You can say all the right words, but if your body language says, I'm nervous, closed off, or uninterested, the interviewer will feel it.
So, what kind of body language hurts people in interviews?
Avoiding eye contact, looking down too much, crossing your arms tightly, fidgeting constantly, looking at your phone, speaking with a very weak voice.
I think nervous people often don't realize they're doing those things.
They don't. And interviewers often interpret nervous body language as insecurity or lack of confidence.
Even if the person is actually very capable.
Exactly. There's a huge difference between being nervous and looking nervous.
That is such an important point.
One simple trick is to slow down. When people get nervous, they rush everything. They speak faster, move faster, breathe faster.
And then the whole interview feels chaotic.
Right. But if you slow down your breathing and slow down your speaking, you instantly appear calmer.
So even if you feel nervous inside, you can still look confident outside.
Exactly. And remember, confidence is not about acting perfect. It's about looking comfortable enough to trust yourself.
That's such a good definition.
Here's a quick story. I once knew someone who kept losing interviews even though he had great experience. Eventually, he recorded himself doing a practice interview.
And what happened?
He realized he was constantly looking at the floor while answering questions. He didn't even know he was doing it.
Wow.
Only once he fixed that one habit, he started getting much better results.
That's amazing because sometimes one tiny change can make a huge difference.
Exactly. And speaking of tiny changes, reason number 9 is that you focused too much on yourself.
Wait, isn't the interview supposed to be about you?
Yes, but only partly. A lot of people talk only about what they want.
Like, I want better pay, I want more flexibility, I want a promotion.
Exactly. But companies are also asking, what can you do for us?
So if your answers sound too self-focused, you may seem selfish.
Right. Employers want to know how hiring you will solve problems, save time, improve results, or help the team.
So instead of saying, I want this job because it will help my career, you can also say, I think my experience could really help your team grow.
Perfect. That creates balance. You can still talk about your goals, but you should also show how the company benefits from hiring you.
Because interviews are really about value.
Exactly. The interviewer is silently asking, why should we choose you?
And if you don't answer that question clearly, you may lose the job.
Right, even if you're qualified.
This is making me realize how many hidden things happen during interviews.
There are so many hidden signals. And reason number 10 is one of the biggest hidden signals of all. You seemed too desperate.
Oh, wow, this one is hard because sometimes people really are desperate.
Of course, maybe you need money. Maybe you've been unemployed for months. Maybe you're stressed and worried.
And that's understandable.
Completely understandable. But if you sound too desperate in the interview, it can actually make employers uncomfortable.
Because it creates pressure.
Exactly. Imagine someone says, "I'll do anything. Please give me this job. I really need it."
That feels intense.
It does. Employers usually prefer candidates who seem calm, balanced, and confident.
So instead of acting desperate, you should act interested.
Exactly. There's a huge difference between "I need any job" and "I'm genuinely excited about this opportunity."
One sounds emotional, the other sounds professional.
Right. And here's something surprising. People often think desperation makes them look more motivated.
But it usually makes them look less confident.
Exactly. Confidence attracts people. Desperation pushes them away.
That's such a powerful lesson, not only for interviews, but for life.
Very true. And if you've ever been in an interview where you felt nervous and desperate, don't be too hard on yourself.
Because most people have been there at some point.
Absolutely. The key is learning from it and changing your approach next time.
And if you're enjoying this episode, don't forget to like the video because we still have 10 more reasons to go, and some of them are things people almost never think about.
Including one mistake that can ruin your chances before the interview even starts.
That sounds terrifying.
It kind of is. And once you hear it, you'll probably never make that mistake again. Reason number 12 is that your online presence hurt you.
Oh yes, a lot of people forget that companies often search for you online before making a decision.
Exactly. They may check your LinkedIn profile, Facebook, Instagram, or even old posts from years ago.
That's scary because some people think their social media has nothing to do with their job.
But for many employers, it does. If they see offensive comments, unprofessional photos, or angry posts about previous jobs, it can make them hesitate.
Even something small can create a bad impression.
Exactly. And here's the interesting part. Your online presence can also help you.
Really?
Absolutely. A clean LinkedIn profile, a professional photo, positive posts, and evidence of your skills can make you look more credible.
So, before applying for jobs, it's smart to search your own name online.
Yes, see what employers might see. If something looks unprofessional, remove it if possible.
That's such a practical tip.
It is, because sometimes you lose the job before the interview even starts.
Wow.
Reason number 12 is that you were late.
This one seems obvious, but it still happens all the time.
It does, and unfortunately being late sends a terrible message.
It makes people think you're unreliable.
Exactly. Even if you have a good reason, the interviewer may still wonder, if this person is late on interview day, what will they be like at work?
And first impressions are so hard to change.
They really are. That's why you should always aim to arrive early.
How early?
About 10 to 15 minutes early is perfect.
Not 30 minutes?
No, because arriving too early can also make things awkward. But arriving a little early gives you time to breathe, relax, and prepare.
And if the interview is online, you should still be ready early.
Absolutely. Test your microphone, camera, internet connection, and background.
Because technical problems can make you look unprepared.
Exactly. And if something unexpected happens, contact the interviewer immediately.
That shows responsibility.
Right. Employers are usually more understanding when you communicate clearly.
So the problem isn't always being late. Sometimes the bigger problem is staying silent about it.
Exactly. Communication matters.
What's reason number 13?
You didn't explain employment gaps well.
Oh, this is a big fear for a lot of people.
It is. Maybe you stopped working for 6 months, a year, or longer, and when the interviewer asks about it, you panic.
Or you give a strange answer because you're embarrassed.
Exactly. But employment gaps are much more common now than they used to be.
Especially after difficult periods in life.
Right. People take breaks for family, health, education, travel, burnout, or personal reasons.
So having a gap is not automatically a problem.
Not at all. The problem is when you seem uncomfortable, dishonest, or unclear about it.
So what's the best way to answer?
Be honest but stay positive. For example, I took time away from work to care for a family member, and during that time, I also improved my skills through online courses.
That sounds calm and professional.
Exactly. Or you can say, I took a break to reassess my career goals, and now I'm excited to return with a clearer sense of direction.
I love that answer.
The key is not to sound ashamed.
Because if you act like the gap is a huge problem, the interviewer may think it is.
Exactly. But if you present it confidently, they're more likely to accept it.
This episode is making me realize how much confidence changes everything.
It really does. And reason number 14 is another confidence problem. You undersold yourself.
Oh, wow. A lot of people do this, especially if they're shy.
They do. They say things like, I'm not the best, but, or I only have a little experience.
Or, I'm probably not as qualified as the other candidates.
Exactly. Those phrases destroy your credibility.
Because if you don't believe in yourself, why should they believe in you?
That's exactly the issue. Employers want someone who can confidently explain their strengths.
Without sounding arrogant.
Right. There's a balance. You don't want to sound like you're better than everyone else, but you also don't want to sound like you have nothing to offer.
So instead of saying, I only managed a small team, you can say, I had the opportunity to lead a small team and improve communication between departments.
Perfect. Same experience, but much stronger language.
It's really about framing.
Exactly. And one quick tip is to remove weak words from your vocabulary.
Like just, only, and probably.
Yes, instead of saying, I just helped with customer service, say, I handled customer service and resolved client concerns.
That sounds so much more confident.
Because words shape perception.
And if you've ever underestimated yourself in an interview, comment below because I think so many people struggle with this.
Especially people who are actually very talented.
That is so true.
Reason number 16 is that you dressed in a way that didn't match the company culture.
This is interesting because people always say dress professionally, but different companies have different expectations.
Exactly. If you're interviewing at a bank, the dress code may be very formal.
But if you're interviewing at a creative startup, a full suit might actually feel too formal.
Right. The goal is to look polished, clean, and appropriate for the environment.
So you should research the company culture before the interview.
Absolutely. Look at photos of employees on the company website or LinkedIn page.
That's smart.
And remember, your clothes send a message before you even speak.
So if your appearance seems careless, people may assume your work will be careless too.
Exactly. It may not be fair, but first impressions are powerful.
And in the next part, we're going to talk about 5 more reasons people don't get hired, including one mistake that can make you seem difficult to work with, even if you're actually a nice person.
And that mistake happens more often than people realize. Reason number 16 is that you seemed difficult to work with.
Ouch, that one probably hurts because most people don't think of themselves that way.
Exactly. Most people believe they seem friendly and easygoing, but sometimes the way you answer questions can accidentally make you look stubborn, defensive, or hard to manage.
Like how?
Imagine the interviewer asks you, how do you handle feedback? And you say, honestly, I usually know when I'm right.
Oh no.
Or maybe they ask about teamwork and you spend the whole time talking about how other people slowed you down.
That makes it sound like you blame everyone else for problems.
Exactly. Employers want people who can collaborate, adapt, and communicate well.
Because no one wants tension on the team.
Right. Even if you're highly skilled, companies may reject you if they think you'll create drama or conflict.
So you need to show that you're open to learning and easy to work with.
Exactly. You can say things like, I appreciate feedback because it helps me improve. Or, I enjoy working with different personalities because every team member brings something valuable.
Those answers make you sound mature.
They do, and maturity is a huge advantage in interviews.
What's next?
Reason number 18 is you lacked confidence.
Oh yes, this one is huge.
It is, and confidence isn't about being loud or acting like you know everything.
Because some of the most confident people are actually very calm.
Exactly. Real confidence is quiet. It's steady. It's the feeling that you know your value.
So how does low confidence show up in interviews?
Weak handshakes, quiet voices, looking down, apologizing too much, saying things like, I'm sorry, this is probably a bad answer.
Oh, wow. I've definitely heard people do that.
A lot of people do it because they're afraid of saying the wrong thing.
But by apologizing all the time, they make themselves sound uncertain.
Exactly. Employers want someone who believes they can do the job.
Because if you don't believe it, the interviewer may not believe it either.
Right. One simple trick is to remind yourself of your achievements before the interview.
That's smart.
Write down 5 things you're proud of. Maybe you solved a problem at work, improved a process, helped a customer, or learned a difficult skill.
Because when you remember your strengths, you naturally sound more confident.
Exactly. Confidence is easier when you have evidence. That is such a
Powerful line.
And here's something important for anyone watching. You do not need to be perfect to deserve a job.
I love that.
You just need to show that you're capable, willing to learn, and ready to contribute.
That takes a lot of pressure off.
It does, because so many people walk into interviews thinking they need to impress everyone.
When really, they just need to connect with people.
Exactly. Reason number 19 is that you focused too much on salary too early.
Yes. Money is important, but timing matters.
Very much. If the first thing you ask is, how much does this pay, it can make you seem like you only care about money.
Even if money is one of the main reasons people work.
Exactly. Of course, salary matters. Everyone needs money. But employers usually want to discuss your skills and fit first.
So when should people talk about salary?
Usually later in the process, once the company is already interested in hiring you.
That makes sense.
If salary comes up early, be professional. You can say, I'm open to discussing compensation based on the full responsibilities of the role.
That sounds much better than immediately demanding a number.
Exactly. It keeps the conversation flexible and professional.
And what's the final reason people don't get the job?
Reason number 20 is that they never followed up after the interview.
That's such a missed opportunity.
It really is. A simple thank you message can make a huge difference.
Because it shows professionalism.
Yes, it also reminds the interviewer about you after the meeting is over.
So what should people say in a follow-up message?
Keep it short and polite. Thank them for their time, mention something specific from the interview, and express that you're still interested in the role.
That sounds easy enough.
For example, you can write, "Thank you for taking the time to meet with me today. I enjoyed learning more about the position and your team. I'm very excited about the opportunity to contribute."
That sounds warm and professional.
Exactly. And surprisingly, a lot of candidates never send that message.
Which means if you do send it, you instantly stand out.
Right, and standing out matters because sometimes companies are choosing between 2 candidates who are very similar.
And the person who seems more thoughtful and professional may win.
Exactly. Small details create big results.
This entire episode has made me realize that job interviews are really about much more than qualifications.
They are. Interviews are about trust, communication, confidence, attitude, and emotional connection.
And the good news is that most of these mistakes can be fixed.
Absolutely. Which means if you didn't get the job before, it doesn't mean you'll never get one.
It just means you have new things to improve.
Exactly. And sometimes one small change can completely transform your next interview.
So before our next part, comment below and tell us which of these 20 reasons surprised you the most.
And if you know someone who keeps getting rejected from interviews, share this video with them because it might help them finally understand what's been going wrong.
In the next part, we're going to go even deeper with real interview stories, examples, and situations that show exactly how these mistakes happen in real life.
And trust me, some of those stories are going to feel very familiar. Let's talk about a real example, because this happens all the time. Imagine 2 people apply for the same job.
Same experience?
Almost the same. Similar education, similar skills, similar background.
So how does the company decide?
Candidate number 1 walks into the interview looking nervous and unprepared. When the interviewer asks, "Tell me about yourself," he talks for 5 minutes without stopping.
That already sounds stressful.
Then he complains about his old boss, says he hated his previous company, and spends most of the interview talking about what he wants.
More money, less work, flexible hours.
Exactly. And when the interviewer asks if he has any questions, he says, "No, I think I'm good."
Ouch.
Candidate number 2 has almost the same qualifications, but this person arrives early, smiles, makes eye contact, and gives short, clear answers.
That already feels better.
When asked about a difficult manager, candidate number 2 says, "I learned a lot from that experience, especially how important communication is."
That sounds so much more professional.
Exactly. Then at the end, this person asks thoughtful questions about the company culture and follows up with a thank you email.
So even though both candidates had similar resumes, one person created a much stronger impression.
Exactly. That's why interviews are often decided by small details.
And I think that's important because people often assume they lost because they weren't good enough.
Right, but sometimes they lose because someone else simply presented themselves better.
That's actually encouraging because presentation can improve.
Absolutely. Here's another story. A woman once went through 6 interviews without getting hired.
6?
6. She felt frustrated, confused, and honestly a little hopeless.
I can understand that.
It is, but eventually she asked a friend to do a mock interview with her.
And what did they discover?
They discovered that every time she answered a question, she started with negative language.
Like what?
"I'm not very good at that. I've never really been confident with. I don't have much experience in."
Wow, so before she even talked about her strengths, she was already making herself sound weak.
Exactly. She wasn't bad at interviews because she lacked skills. She was bad at interviews because she was unintentionally destroying her own image.
That is such an important lesson.
It really is. Once she changed the way she spoke, she started getting job offers.
That fast?
Yes, because confidence changes how people see you.
I think a lot of viewers probably do the same thing without realizing it.
Absolutely. They use weak phrases like just, only, kind of, and maybe.
I only helped with the project.
Exactly. Instead, say, "I contributed to the project and helped improve the results."
Same truth, different energy.
Exactly. Here's another situation that happens all the time. Someone goes into an interview and tries too hard to sound impressive.
I know this one.
They use complicated words, long explanations, and business language that doesn't sound natural.
Like they're trying to sound smarter than they really are.
Exactly. But interviewers can usually feel when someone is trying too hard.
So instead of sounding intelligent, they sound fake.
Right. One of the most powerful things you can do in an interview is speak simply and clearly.
That's such a good reminder, especially for English learners.
Absolutely. You do not need perfect English to succeed in an interview.
That's important.
You just need clear communication. If your English is simple but confident, that is often much more effective than complicated English with hesitation.
That probably takes pressure off a lot of people watching.
I hope so, because many English learners think, "I can't get the job because my English isn't perfect."
But often the bigger issue is fear, not language.
Exactly. Employers are usually more interested in whether they can understand you, trust you, and work with you.
Not whether every grammar rule is perfect.
Right. Here's a quick tip for anyone preparing for an interview in English. Practice introducing yourself out loud.
That's so helpful.
Practice saying who you are, what experience you have, what your strengths are, and why you want the role.
Because if you can do the introduction confidently, the rest of the interview feels easier.
Exactly. The beginning of the interview often sets the emotional tone for everything that follows.
So if you start strong, you usually feel more relaxed.
Right. And here's another story. A man applied for a customer service job and kept getting rejected.
What was his problem?
During interviews, he gave very short answers.
I thought talking too much was bad.
It is, but talking too little is also a problem.
Ah, so there needs to be balance.
Exactly. If the interviewer asks, "Why do you want this role?" and you answer, "I don't know, it seems okay," that creates no connection.
That sounds so cold.
It does. Even if you're shy, you still need to give enough detail for the interviewer to understand you.
So instead of one-sentence answers, give short explanations with examples.
Exactly. Think of your answers like mini stories.
That makes it much easier.
For example, if someone asks, "What's one of your strengths?" don't just say, "I'm organized."
Say something like, I'm organized because in my last role I had to manage several tasks at once and still meet every deadline.
Perfect. That answer is much stronger.
Because now the interviewer can imagine you doing the job.
Exactly. Stories are powerful because they create pictures in people's minds.
And people remember pictures more than facts.
Very true. Here's another mistake people make. They try to memorize every answer before the interview.
Oh, wow, I used to do that.
A lot of people do. They memorize perfect answers word for word.
But then if the interviewer asks the question differently, everything falls apart.
Exactly. Suddenly they panic because the conversation is not following the script in their head.
So instead of memorizing exact answers, it's better to memorize ideas.
Yes, know your stories, know your strengths, know your examples.
But don't try to sound like a robot.
Exactly. Interviews should sound natural, not rehearsed.
Because if you sound too rehearsed, people may think you're not being genuine.
Right. One of the best compliments you can receive after an interview is when someone says, "You seemed authentic."
That word is so powerful.
It is. People trust authenticity.
And I think that's what viewers should remember most from this episode.
Absolutely. You do not need to become a different person to get hired.
You just need to become a clearer, more confident version of yourself.
Exactly. And if you've ever struggled with interviews, remember this. Every bad interview can teach you something.
That's such a positive way to see it.
It has to be. Because if you see every rejection as proof that you're a failure, you'll lose confidence.
But if you see rejection as feedback, you grow.
Exactly. Sometimes rejection is not the end. Sometimes it's preparation for a better opportunity.
I love that.
And in the next part, we're going even deeper into the psychology of interviews, including why some people get hired even when they're less qualified than everyone else.
That is so interesting because I think a lot of people have seen that happen.
They have. And once you understand why it happens, interviews will make a lot more sense. Have you ever noticed that sometimes the most qualified person doesn't get the job?
Yes, and it feels so unfair.
It does. You look at someone and think, wait, I had more experience than that person.
Or I had better qualifications.
Exactly. But here's the truth. Companies do not always hire the most qualified person.
Then who do they hire?
Usually they hire the person who makes them feel the most confident.
That is such an important distinction.
Think about it like this. Imagine one candidate has amazing experience, but during the interview, they seem negative, awkward, and difficult to connect with.
And another candidate has slightly less experience, but they seem friendly, confident, and easy to work with.
Most companies will choose the second person.
Because they imagine working with that person every day.
Exactly. Employers are not only hiring skills, they're hiring energy, attitude, and trust.
That's why some people keep saying, I don't understand why they picked someone else.
Right, because they only focus on qualifications and forget about connection.
So interviews are really about reducing fear.
That's such a smart way to say it. Employers are afraid of making the wrong decision.
Because hiring the wrong person costs time, money, and stress.
Exactly. So during the interview, they are constantly looking for reasons to feel safe.
Safe that you can do the job.
Safe that you'll be reliable. Safe that you'll get along with the team. Safe that you won't create problems.
So if you can make the interviewer feel calm and confident, you immediately become more attractive as a candidate.
Exactly. That's why emotional intelligence matters so much in interviews.
What does emotional intelligence look like in an interview?
It means noticing the mood of the room, listening carefully, responding appropriately, staying calm under pressure.
And not panicking if something unexpected happens.
Exactly. For example, maybe the interviewer asks a difficult question and you don't know the answer.
That's one of the scariest moments.
It is, but some people panic, freeze, or start saying random things.
Which usually makes the situation worse.
Exactly. A better response is to stay calm and say, I haven't had that exact experience yet, but here's how I would approach it.
That sounds so much more confident.
Because confidence is not about knowing everything, it's about handling uncertainty well.
That is such a powerful lesson.
Here's another deep insight. Many people think interviews are tests.
Aren't they?
Not exactly. Interviews are more like conversations with goals.
Explain that.
When you think of an interview as a test, you become obsessed with giving perfect answers.
And then you get nervous because you're afraid of making mistakes.
Exactly. But when you think of it as a conversation, you relax more.
Because conversations feel more natural.
Right. You stop trying to sound perfect and start trying to sound real.
That probably makes a huge difference.
It does. People connect more with authenticity than perfection.
So if you make one small mistake in an interview, it's not the end of the world.
Not at all. In fact, sometimes small imperfections make you seem more human.
I never thought about it like that.
Imagine someone who sounds too perfect.
That can feel fake.
Exactly. But someone who says, I was nervous at first, but I learned a lot from that experience, sounds more real.
And people trust real people.
They do. Here's another thing most people don't realize. Interviewers often decide how they feel about you within the first few minutes.
That's so fast.
It is, sometimes within the first 30 seconds.
Wow.
That doesn't mean the rest of the interview doesn't matter, but first impressions are incredibly powerful.
So the way you walk in, smile, shake hands, and introduce yourself matters a lot.
Exactly. Your opening energy can influence everything that happens after that.
That's why preparation is so important.
Absolutely. If you rush into the interview stressed and distracted, it affects your performance.
But if you arrive calm and prepared, you create a much better first impression.
Right. And here's one more interesting thing. People often think confidence comes first and success comes second.
But sometimes it's the opposite.
Exactly. Sometimes you build confidence by taking action before you feel ready.
That is such a good point.
You may not feel confident before the interview.
Especially if you've been rejected before.
Right. But if you prepare, practice, and show up anyway, your confidence grows over time.
So confidence is not something you wait for, it's something you build.
Exactly. And every interview gives you experience.
Even the bad ones.
Especially the bad ones.
Because those are the interviews that teach you the most.
Right. Maybe one interview teaches you to stop talking too much. Another teaches you to prepare better. Another teaches you to believe in yourself more.
So every rejection can make you stronger if you learn from it.
Exactly. And that's why people who eventually succeed are not always the smartest people.
They're the people who keep improving.
Exactly. They keep learning, adjusting, and trying again.
I think that's something every viewer needs to hear.
Definitely. Because it's easy to think, I got rejected, so there must be something wrong with me.
But rejection is often just redirection.
I love that.
Sometimes the job you didn't get was not the right one for you anyway.
Very true. And sometimes the interview that went badly is the exact experience that prepares you for the interview that changes your life.
That is such a beautiful way to think about it.
And before we move into the final recap, take a second and think about your last interview.
Ask yourself, what could I improve next time?
Because once you identify the problem, you can start fixing it.
And once you start fixing it, everything changes.
Exactly. So let's quickly recap the biggest lessons from today because there were a lot.
20 reasons, and honestly, every single one can change the result of an interview.
Exactly. You may not have gotten the job because you didn't research the company enough.
Or because you talked too much.
Or because you sounded negative, unprepared, or indifferent.
Maybe you forgot to ask questions at the end.
Maybe your body language made you seem nervous.
Maybe you focused too much on yourself and not enough on how you could help the company.
Maybe you sounded desperate instead of confident.
Or maybe you used weak language and accidentally undersold yourself.
You may have been late, too quiet, too rehearsed, or too focused on salary.
And maybe you never followed up after the interview.
The important thing is this: none of these mistakes mean you're a failure.
They just mean you have room to improve.
Exactly, and that's actually good news.
Because if the problem can be identified, it can be fixed.
Right, you do not need to become a completely different person.
You just need to become more aware of how you present yourself.
More confident.
More prepared.
More positive.
More intentional.
And remember, interviews are not only about proving that you can do the job.
They're also about helping the interviewer feel comfortable choosing you.
That's why your emotion, energy, communication, and confidence matters so much.
Because people hire people they trust.
Exactly. And if you've been rejected before, don't let that destroy your confidence.
Every rejection teaches you something.
Every interview gives you practice.
And every mistake gives you a chance to improve.
One day, you're going to walk out of an interview feeling proud of yourself.
And maybe for the first time, you'll know exactly why it went well.
Because now you understand the hidden reasons people get rejected.
Which means you can avoid them.
And that gives you a huge advantage.
So if this episode helped you, make sure you subscribe to Talk Easy Daily because we create videos that help you improve your English, your confidence, and your communication skills in real life.
And if you know someone who keeps getting rejected from interviews, share this video with them because it might be exactly what they need right now.
Also, comment below and tell us which of the 20 reasons surprised you the most. Was it body language, asking no questions, talking too much, or sounding too desperate?
We'd love to hear your experience.
And remember, not getting one job does not mean you'll never get the right one.
Sometimes the opportunity you missed is leading you to a better opportunity you haven't seen yet.
Keep learning.
Keep improving.
And keep believing in yourself.
We'll see you in the next episode of Talk Easy Daily.